When a complex system is placed under crushing weight, it doesn't fail evenly. It fractures along its deepest pre-existing fault lines. Standard measurements for an economic crash rely on top-line aggregates. We watch stock indexes drop, track dips in gross domestic product, and monitor national inflation rates. These big-picture metrics suggest that a recession is a universal experience, a storm we all weather together. Broad averages flatten the data, hiding the brutal reality happening on the ground. To measure the actual cost of a financial downturn, we have to look past the spreadsheets. We need to treat an economic crash as a society-wide psychological stress test, one that exposes exactly where our demographic foundations are the weakest. If we rely only on macroeconomic indicators, we are actively blinding ourselves to the specific populations suffering the most severe and sometimes lethal psychological damage. The first major fault line sits between generations, specifically targeting millennials and Generation Z. Young adults facing a recession today are hit by a precise combination of pressures: historically high rent, heavy student loan balances, and labor markets that offer little to no job security. Older demographic groups, like baby boomers, generally face those same market dips with decades of accumulated home equity and savings acting as a financial shock absorber. This bar chart comparing living costs against stagnant early career incomes illustrates a severe deficit. Young people are forced to fill that gap simply to survive, relying heavily on high-interest credit card debt. The burden of carrying that precarious debt load translates directly into profound emotional distress. Public health data shows that during significant downturns, adults of early working age face a heavily elevated risk of suicide. We often assume youth provides a natural resilience to hardship. The data shows the opposite. Being young during a financial crash is a severe vulnerability when you haven't had time to build a financial buffer. The pressure of a failing economy also splinters psychological resilience along strict gender lines, forcing men and women to break in drastically different ways. Women typically experience what researchers track as a chronic squeeze. This manifests as prolonged anxiety, sustained periods of psychological distress, and higher rates of hospitalizations for depressive illnesses. This sustained burnout is driven by a double penalty. Women in lower income brackets often have to navigate precarious employment while simultaneously carrying the massive, uncompensated workload of child and elder care. Yet there is a distinct pattern in the epidemiological data. Even though women report much higher baseline levels of distress during a crash, female suicide rates generally remain steady. That steady rate contrasts sharply with the acute break seen in middle-aged men. Cultural expectations still heavily tie a man's core identity and his perceived self-worth to his ability to act as the primary financial provider for his household. This timeline maps the two diverging responses to economic pressure. While the line for chronic distress in women plateaus at a high level, the second line, representing men who lose jobs, shows a violent surge upward, translating to a spike in extreme behaviors and middle-aged male suicides. These are not abstract statistics. In recent history, severe debt crises pushed populations to literal, lethal breaking points. Societal roles actively weaponize an economic downturn. The expectation of continuous caregiving turns financial strain into chronic burnout for women, while for men, the loss of a job triggers a fatal crisis of identity. Beneath generational and gender divides lies the most consistent structural fault line of all, the intersection of socioeconomic status, education level, and race. There is a common assumption that if you manage to keep your job during a recession, you are safe from the psychological fallout. Workers who keep their jobs often face severe psychological distress caused by sudden increases in workload, the constant fear of sudden downsizing, and heightened workplace harassment. A paycheck does not insulate you from the pressure. This scatterplot demonstrates a dose response. As financial precariousness increases on the x-axis, psychological decline rises on the y-axis. In the upper right quadrant, we see the heaviest damage. Marginalized communities enduring the highest exposure to poverty experience devastating rates of psychological deterioration and substance abuse. In a crisis, financial insecurity acts exactly like a physical toxin in the human body. The higher the exposure dose, the more debilitating the symptoms. Eventually, every crash reaches an afterstate. Gross domestic product turns positive again, the stock market recovers its losses, and the media officially declares the recession over. But the psychological scars inflicted on the most vulnerable demographic groups don't vanish when the market rallies. They remain permanently embedded in the population. Standard economic interventions, like federal interest rate cuts or massive bank bailouts, are designed to fix spreadsheets. They completely fail to address this localized human damage. The data demands targeted, structural interventions. That means deploying immediate debt relief for young workers, establishing robust childcare safety nets for women, and providing direct identity-based mental health resources tailored to men facing sudden unemployment. We measure true economic resilience by how effectively we reinforce our most vulnerable fault lines before the next stress test arrives.